Yo, what's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the latest on what could be coming here in 2023, and my opinions on what we could potentially see in terms of some pretty big name players that may be on their way out of their current franchise. So we're going to take a look at some of those names today. So we're going to start off with the ones that are the most obvious and work our way down to the ones that are a little bit more interesting and kind of tinfoil hat theory sort of things. When you're drunk, you kind of think, okay, that guy could move, this and that. So we'll work our way down to that part of the list, and I'm sure there will be some adversity and some controversy about the idea of some of these guys moving on. So let's get right into it. So we're going to start off with the guys up in Chicago. This is no real surprise. Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews are on the final years of that joint contract they signed back, I think it was 8 or 10 years ago. And the Chicago Blackhawks are now seemingly in the midst of a rebuild. And it doesn't sound like Kane or Toews are a part of the long-term plans there in the Windy City. And it leaves a lot of speculation about where both of these guys could end up. Jonathan Toews has been tied to the Winnipeg Jets, the Colorado Avalanche, the Dallas Stars. Meanwhile, for Patrick Kane, there's been rumors around the Rangers, the Islanders, and the Los Angeles Kings, with a couple of other teams in the mix as well, like the Boston Bruins. So it's going to be interesting to see what value the Blackhawks get for these two in return here before the deadline. But I think it's inevitable that these two will indeed be traded by the deadline, considering the Blackhawks are one of the bottom feeders of the NHL standings, as well as the body language of those two when they play. It seems like there's some frustration and some idea that, yeah, they're trying to make it miserable, so we don't want to come back here. And I think that's kind of where the Blackhawks are going to be sitting in 2023. Moving to the Vancouver Canucks, I think there's a plethora of guys you could throw on this list, but the most notable one right now is their captain, Bo Horvat, who as well is in the final year of his contract with the Canucks and will be set to hit unrestricted free agency next July 1st. Bo Horvat has also been tied to a plethora of the same teams as Kane and Toews. There's been rumors that the Minnesota Wild could be in the mix here. There's definitely some options there for the Minnesota Wild, looking to add a number one center. The Dallas Stars are also in the mix there. The Islanders have been tied to Bo Horvat as well. There's a couple of interesting teams that could come out here over the next couple of months in the Bo Horvat sweepstakes. But Bo Horvat, I'm going to say pretty confidently we will see a Bo Horvat trade before the NHL trade deadline this spring. John Klingberg of the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks are currently, again, kind of similar to Chicago in this sense, one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League this season. So it's kind of safe to assume a guy that's coming in on a one-year deal, the prove-it contract, might end up going somewhere here before the trade deadline as a potential rental. The Anaheim Ducks are looking to get some value for this guy, so hopefully he becomes worthy of a first or second round pick, make it worth the Ducks' while throughout most of the season, taking a roster spot and eating up some money. But I think that the Ducks are looking to continue their rebuild this season, and with the way they're playing right now, it's safe to say that long-term, John Klingberg is probably not part of the solution here in Anaheim. I think a lot of teams will be interested here. I know the Oilers have been linked to a potential move up there with John Klingberg. A couple of other teams have been thrown around, like Boston in the past. So it's more an idea of just looking for teams that need top four defensemen or potentially a fifth defenseman. That's where John Klingberg is likely to fit at this point going into the trade deadline. Jakob Chychrun, another defenseman. He's a little bit more of a wild card. I think he's a guy that could end up getting moved during the summer next year. We talked about that this past year, and it never materialized. I think the Coyotes are pretty stance on their idea of getting 2 first-round picks for Jakob Chychrun, and I think if they get anything less than that, we're not going to see a deal getting done anytime soon. So I think that the Coyotes sense here that they have a little leverage. They don't need to trade him right now. He's not, sitting out of the lineup. He's playing the games. So if he's going to be here and he's got to kind of earn his worth, there is a chance here that Chychrun gets traded before the deadline. But I would be more comfortable in saying this summer in 2023, we will see a deal for Jakob Chychrun. So now we start to get to ones that are a little bit more controversial. The first one being Dylan Larkin. Dylan Larkin of the Red Wings, he's their captain. He grew up playing in Michigan, a true Michigander. And the problem with Dylan Larkin is he's on a new expiring contract next summer. So there is some suspicion about what could happen here. It could come down to the wire in Detroit, even past the deadline. And there's always some concern there for a team that, is on the outside of the playoffs looking in. But there is always, again, if you have a good month of hockey and the other teams ahead of you in the Metro struggle, which is asking for a lot, but it could happen, the Red Wings could find themselves right back in the picture. But the problem is with Larkin, do you want to sacrifice waiting till after the deadline to get a deal done? And then at that point, he might say, well, let's wait till the summer. Let's see what other offers are out there. And that's kind of when you get into the danger zone and the twilight zone. I think that the Red Wings and Steve Yzerman would like to do everything possible to avoid that. I think it's a critical move for them to re-sign Dylan Larkin. This is a benchmark contract for the Red Wings. This is a guy that if they sign him to a very good contract, kind of like we saw Yzerman do in Tampa, they sign him to a fair contract. Everybody else has to sign for either equal or lesser value in a contract, and that could end up being a real advantage for the Red Wings. So Steve Yzerman has to be really careful with what he does here. But there's a huge contract here for the Detroit Red Wings this summer because Mo Seider is up in 2 years from now. Lucas Raymond is up in 2 years from now. And of course, you'll start to see some of the other younger guys and their contracts coming up as well. But I think that, going into 2024, I think the precedent set with a really good contract for Larkin really makes things easier for 2 years from now for the Red Wings. David Pasternak, kind of a similar situation, but slightly different. David Pasternak is the best player on the Bruins, and I think they have to do everything possible to make sure that he stays in Boston, whether that means $11 million, even as much as $12.5 million per season. I think the Bruins have to do everything possible to keep him back. And I think that the Bruins are a team that would like to add another blue liner, add some depth, add another scoring forward up front. But truthfully, none of that matters if they don't keep David Pasternak. They need to sign Pasta long term, and then they could start to worry about some of those other semantic issues with their team, because there is no perfect team out there. But you know what? David Pasternak is the core of this Bruins team moving forward. They need to keep him and lock him up long term. Chris Kreider of the Rangers. Now, this is going to end up being another video in the future, but I think the Rangers have to decide who their allegiance is going to lie with. And this is all on Chris Drury. Is he going to go with the younger talent, the unproven talents in Capo Caco, Alexis Lafreniere, and Filipino, the young guys, the young line? Or are they going to commit to Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, and Chris Kreider? And Chris Kreider's on my list here because I think Kreider is a guy that, of those three guys I mentioned, in Zibanejad, Panarin, and Kreider, I think the most likely to get traded is Kreider. They have other guys in the lineup that can similarly fill out that role. I think Kreider is a little bit more of a presence physically than some of those other guys in the Rangers lineup. But if you're expecting Lafreniere or Kakko to jump into the top six at some point in their NHL careers with the Rangers, you need to move on from Kreider. And that's also $6 million of cap space that the Rangers could save, which could be very nice. And the thing is with Kreider, he's coming off of a bad season this year, but last year he was incredible for the Red Wings, for the Rangers. He had a career season, Mr. Ranger for the Rangers, winning that award. He was really, really good last year and was a huge part of the Rangers' success in that push for the playoffs. So I expect him, if they decide to keep those younger players like Kakko and Lafreniere and Hedl, a guy like Chris Kreider could very quickly find his way out the door in Manhattan. And it's kind of weird because Kreider has always been a lifelong Ranger, even in that, really good prime era of Henrik Lundqvist. So he's been there for a decade now. And it's one of those things that you never want to talk about the Kreider trade possibility, but it is potentially on the table in 2023. And the last guy we're going to talk about today is William Nylander. William Nylander is more, it's not really as much William Nylander, it's more about Austin Matthews and what the Leafs decide to do with Matthews. Because if the money isn't there to sign Austin Matthews, that's where Nylander's name gets thrown out there and is a guy that is potentially expendable. You have younger guys on the wing in that top six, like Michael Bunting, that can come in and be a cheaper option than Nylander, and it makes him expendable. And you have Marner, you have Tavares, you have only so many forward contracts you can keep, and I think that's one of those things where Nylander might become a kind of a sacrifice in order to keep Matthews long term and potentially getting his $15 million per season contract in store. So it's a big year for the Leafs as well. Again, I think this is all just rumors and chatter and something we're going to talk about maybe more in the offseason next year, but it's definitely something to consider. And I think that as we get closer to the trade deadline, seeing where teams are really at, I think there's a lot of really good races in the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference for who could make the playoffs. But as that starts to settle itself out more into the springtime, I think teams are going to decide the direction of their team moving forward. And it's going to be kind of an interesting year here in 2023, especially with some of those big names that are still unsigned, like a Horvat, like a Klingberg, Toews, Kane, Larkin, Pasternak. There's some pretty big names going into next summer's NHL free agency. It's just a matter of time before they sign or extend, or maybe they wait till July 1st to sign with a new team. So I guess we'll have to wait to see how that all goes. But let me know what you guys think down below. I mentioned a couple of guys that could be on their way out going into 2023 as we get into this new year. Of course, Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you again next time.